In this video, we're going to take a look at how I went about creating some of the textures for the True Folding Knife. And one of the main things I want to show you guys is how I start establishing the landmarks on an asset like this, right? So those are like the main identifying marks, and everything else can be driven through that using a property in Substance Painter called anchor points. So a lot of artists that you see when they're creating stuff like this, they will maybe make one mask and they'll have an anchor point and everything's derived from that. Generally, when I have the identifying feature, I try to break up that mask into 3 parts at least, right? Generally, that's kind of my guidelines. So I have a main damage mask, and then there is some height information that doesn't necessarily follow exactly to the T across the board. So there's like maybe some areas like right there where it's dug in just a little bit deeper. And then I have what I call a kind of like a brighten mask or something like that, or like just areas where I'm trying to highlight a few kind of freshly scratched areas or parts that are a little bit cleaner. So, you know, everything doesn't have to match up exactly to your initial mask or your height information. While that will look good, it probably won't look as realistic. So again, that's how I break them up. And when I'm doing this on a full asset, I'm paying really close attention to the shapes, the negative shapes it's creating. I don't want things to get too caught up into too many details, so I might like simplify some things. Again, readability is more important than reality. It's got to look good from far away. It's got to read really well from close up if you want to get some really kind of in-depth renders. So yeah, this damage area probably actually had probably 5 variations, because then I also have a little bit of milling and decolorization on the file area, and then I have like fresh filing marks on top. So this was probably the most layered thing that I've done. I'm going to go ahead and hide that and just show you guys how I built that up. So with this fresh kind of area, the only thing that's on here is the base area and a little bit of colorization. So we'll drop in a new fill layer and go ahead and name it. I'm going to name this probably something like Blade Main Damage, just something to keep things organized. This has become the basis of where all damage on the blade is allowed to kind of express itself. Go ahead and then mask it with a black mask like always. And then I'm going to start with a paint layer to go in with my stencils. So the stencil that I'm using here is actually I created from one of my reference images on my mood board from a knife that I found on eBay. Okay, so I took that image into Photoshop, decolored it, changed the levels a little bit, and turned it into a stencil. It doesn't even match my blade, but I can just kind of get the details where I want, rotate it so it matches the profile of my blade and the shape. Now, you don't have to have something like this to do that, but I can go ahead and rotate it and kind of chip the bottom maybe a little bit, you know, just by making it a little bit larger. Or I can bring in other stencils, and again, I'm just paying attention to those types of shapes that I'm getting. But this is just kind of roughing stuff in. I'm going to rough it in a little bit, maybe change the stencil, see what I can get out of it, and then clean it up as needed. So I have a ton of like stencils. Here's a couple that I've made. I think I talked about this in like my level 80 article. I have my favorite stencils are literally just created from door jambs. They have some interesting scratches that probably nobody else has because again, I created them. So when I'm going in here, I can come in with this cool little like scratch that I have that's pretty sharp and just add it kind of anywhere I want. You can see that right here it doesn't fit to the tool end of the blade, and so in here I can just go ahead and just put that in myself and just add a continuation. Okay. And then I also use these kind of like jerry cans that kind of have like rust. Again, these were from textures.com, and pretty much every hard surface or weapon artist has these. It's kind of like the intro set that you got to get, and just take them into Photoshop, decolor. A lot of them you'll invert and then just change the contrast, and you're going to have all these cool little grunges with interesting shapes that you can just rotate around and use. So yeah, I'm just trying to find like an area where I can, kind of make it look like that part of the blade where it goes from the painted area to the filing area. The paint is chipped away a little bit. So yeah, nothing too crazy here, right? Like it's fairly simple. And then you can always go in and clean it up. So sometimes I'll use the same thing or another stencil and just invert my paint. So now I'm, multiplying or, removing it. But on the back side, I didn't even have like another reference. All I did is take the same thing and rotate it. So this doesn't have any mirrored geometry on this because you can see both sides of the blade. And I'm just going to change it to a different position so it doesn't match exactly. And, flipping back and forth, you would never know that I used the same thing. But that mark right there, that's kind of looks like a set of tweezers in a way, or like kind of wire. It would be pretty obvious if those were duplicated, right? So I made sure not to scrub those ones in. And then we'll go to one of our kind of grunge alphas on a jerry can and kind of just irregulate this edge. Just make it kind of look cool. Dial it back if it went a little too crazy. And here you can see that my stencil wasn't necessarily clean. It's also a little blurrier than I liked. So you can come in here and edit this by hand. When I did the full project, again, I wasn't like in a time crunch. I was just trying to make the best possible asset textures and renders that I could. And so I actually just went in and erased most of it and cleaned it all up by hand. It can be really kind of challenging and time consuming. And some of these areas can be really difficult. So what I'll do is I will actually use another stencil and use that to clean up the edge if it was blurry. Again, blurry textures, even if you have high textile density, is probably not going to be very desired. And if you go in and you try to sharpen it like procedurally, that's going to turn noisy. So again, if you're willing to put the time and you have the time to put into it, this is going to be the effect that's probably going to look best. It's going to be unique and look cool. It's going to look deliberate. It's going to match your reference, and it's going to tell the story that you want. So let's take a look at some of these other areas. I have a series of like washers. They have like 5, maybe 6 different alphas down there. I probably should at some point just combine them all in Photoshop into one alpha, so I don't have to bring out like 5 or 6 different. I could just kind of move them around. But I wanted to show you this part as well because this is a common issue that you will see when you're using a stencil workflow, which is the primary way that I texture my hero assets. I'll use a little bit of kind of generators and procedural stuff with noises to lay the groundwork of the base stuff, but then all the important stuff is essentially put in by hand. But let's take a look as I've done this projection. You're going to see on the side what we call projection errors. You can see how that's like sliding through almost like you did a planar projection of UV space. And you can go ahead and edit those just by dialing them out. But a lot of times I'm not the most efficient, far from it, when it comes to creating my layer stacks. So you can just paint them out and it would be fine. But if you paint over the thing, it's kind of going to destroy it, right? Which I don't like, because I'm not that clean with it. So I just created a new paint layer, change it to multiply, and then I can scrub them out. And if I overdo it, I can just, go back to X. So it goes back to white, and then you would reveal. So this is how I clean it up. I prefer to do a separate layer that's just multiplying it out, and it's good. That's also why I tend to not put my spine and my edges in the same layer stack. I can always just put them together in a anchor stack later on, which I'll show you in the video. So again, come in here and clean this. I'm not going to bore you guys with showing that whole process, but here's a artifact of what you'll see. You can see areas that are bumpy. Those are areas that would need to be cleaned up. And you can see this stair-stepping aliasing that's going on. If you ever see anything like this, this is an indication that the values associated or next to each other or adjacent, there's not enough range, right? It's too drastic of a fall off. So if you see any like dark black outline, almost like if you remember when you put a tangent space normal in your materials, say in Maya, it's reading as a bump, you'll see like this crazy stepping, right? If you see this, again, your values between one to another are too drastic, and you can also see that it's blurred, it's in the mask. So again, if I went in here and just cleaned it up with my tool a little bit, softened it and just cleaned it up, and then came in with another stencil, probably the vast majority of this would disappear. And if it doesn't, you can see where I did it. It's quite a bit cleaner, but it still has a little bit of that dark outline effect. And the only way to alleviate that is I'd either need to smooth that out, kind of get rid of some of the noise, or just need to dial back the intensity of the height. So as you can see, I bring that down, all of a sudden that goes away. You only need a slight variation in your height to have it read when light hits across the surface. Use your height information sparingly, but you have to use it intentionally, and you can really have a really awesome effect on your just your surface readability. But you can see how I'm cleaning this up. Again, in the actual texture that I created, I went in and spent hours cleaning up this mask. When I'm done with that mask, I'm going to right click at the top and say add anchor point. On all my anchor points, I tend to label them as all caps, and it's what it is. And so now I have an anchor point that can reference anywhere later on. Okay, so this is the first aspect. Now, this is all great if everything is uniform across the surface in terms of your height information. But again, I just want to establish where things can take place, drop in a new fill layer. And this one's going to be specific to depth variation that doesn't necessarily match where there's tone or roughness variation, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I do kind of a general, here's where everything's at or where it could be, and I make sure that I like that. And then I can go in and add a separate material and say, I'm just going to have it at a black mask. I'm going to make it so it's only height information only. And you can see here, I can just kind of paint anywhere that I want, right? But I want to limit it to where I said it can go, which is the main damage. And for that to happen, this is where anchor points are super, super powerful. So to limit to where this depth variation can happen, I just need to come in and add a new fill layer. So when I add a new fill layer, click and then go over to anchor points and then find the name of the anchor point that you want to reference. So there we go. So once we've limited it, now you can see it has this exponential effect because of where it was at, right? So I'm just going to show you that it's the exact same thing we just created before. Anchor points are pretty cool where you can change the levels. So you can clamp them off, you can push out values, you can invert them, and it has all this kind of like flexibility right there. And that's not going to be destructive to the thing that you're referencing. That thing stays the way it is, but that thing that you made before, if you change that, it will update this layer, if that makes sense. So anchor points it has to reference something that's below it. It can only influence what's above. Okay, so here I'm going to go ahead and just change it to a paint layer into subtract. So that way I only can influence the layer that's above. There's a lot of different ways that you could do this. A paint layer set to attract, or what I could do is I could set that paint layer to multiply and just fill it black and then paint white back to have it pop up in those areas. So again, this is how I can add height variations just to those areas. And this can add some pretty cool variety. So usually I just kind of slice these in a little bit, and then I can change it to my blur tool to kind of smooth it in and make it look like something dug in, like maybe near the top, and then slowly like slid out a little bit. So again, I'd use this with a little bit of caution, but this adds just this really kind of cool, unique aspect to it. So again, you go to the smudge tool, your little blur tool, and just kind of smooth that out. You also can change, in Painter under your brushes, you can go brushes under your, not your project, but under your projects, the starter content, not the project specific, and you can just go to a blur brush and kind of ease it up a little bit. So yeah, this is kind of how I just handle that. And so I get some unique areas. And if this is still overpowered, I could come in with a new paint layer over top, or just paint directly on this if I like it. So we can just switch this to black and change the opacity, and you can see just be a little bit more subtle with that new height variation. The cool part here is that I can change that height variation depth on the fill layer, and that's kind of like the clamp. And then on the left hand side, you can see right now I'm in under layers. The texture property that I'm in, or map property, is height, so I can dial that back as well. I think in the end I ended up not really liking the layers and blur. That's not what I did in the real thing, so I got rid of it. On this, I'm going to add a new anchor point. Again, I tend to like my anchor points in all caps. I'm going to name it, and now we're done with this layer. If I like that, I can go and create a variety. So like where this goes, I can change color between the two, where it gets a little bit darker. I can also use that one to reference dirt later on. So it just gives me a lot of flexibility. The last thing I like to do on most of damage is add bright spots. They're just like artistically where I want things to shine. These are also going to be probably a little bit smoother, like they're brand new, and a little bit brighter in the metalness. Again, I'm not going to full metal, but somewhere like 0.87, and then a little bit hotter. Now to reference this, I'm going to drop in a fill layer. I'm going to change the anchor point to the blade main damage. And then we're going to go ahead and add as a linear dodge, right? And so if I change that to linear dodge, I can go ahead and, or multiply, either will work, and just make it black. And now when I paint it back, you can see that I'm seeing a little bit of that color. So to make this obvious, I just changed to color instead of material. You can see I'm just going to make a few of these just a little bit hotter on the edges in a few places. And you don't have to be like super neat with it. It kind of just all like will work out. So, I do kind of rough it in, and then if I'm liking it and filling it, then I'll clean it up. What I wanted to show you guys here is that I went back to the main damage and started adding some additional scratches on this other side. And by doing so, and a few other things that I just thought were some cool details that I missed, what will happen is it's going to update all the additional information on the layers above it that are referencing that. So again, you can see these ones have some extra depth. I can go in there and kind of clean them up, put them where they want. But I just wanted to show you the interactivity of having the anchor point system set up cleanly on how it's referencing. I can go back and clean up this bottom part of the blade at any time. Just go down there and clean it up. So I'll just let this kind of play for a minute. I'm just using the stencils to kind of get the shape. So when I'm putting in stuff like this, I don't want there to be like a ton of like crazy silhouettes. Like I want to follow the line so it kind of catches the eye, but you can still move through the product. Okay, so now here I'm just showing off the different masks. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty, and this is where I create my anchor stack chain. This is what I call this. This is the name that I give. Okay, and what I do is I add a fill layer for every anchor point, and the first one is just going to be the main, and it's going to be default. And then the next one here, I'm going to add, typically is a linear dodge, unless I wanted to take away, then I could change it to a subtract or a multiply. So here, the reason why it looks like this is because I actually forgot to make an anchor point on the bright. And as soon as I make an anchor point on the bright, and I change this one to anchor point bright, damage bright, and then you can see these things are interacting together. If I'm not really noticing this one, I can go ahead and I can change that blend mode to something else like subtract. There we go. We can now see that effect, and we can see where the area is lighter. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll create an anchor point on the top of this, and I'll usually name this something like Blade Master Damage Master Mask. Okay, So this is an anchor point that I can reference later on that's referencing everything underneath it that it's referencing, right? So instead of in a future stack having 4 or 5 fill layers, each with referencing an anchor point, I can just reference this one that's an empty layer that's referencing the rest. I'm now going to add the spine detail, which I forgot. So if I want this to be able to go into the stack, I need to form this new fill layer underneath the master damage layer. Okay, so here I'm going and putting in the values. Just a heads up, usually when I'm doing this, I will actually copy the fill layer material from the previous, so I have the same values and they're consistent. So again, we're going to start with the paint layer, and what I'm going to do is just kind of come in here with the stencil that I made, again, from one of my photo references, and just start dialing it in. The thing is, these don't need to, again, be perfect. Again, I'm kind of trying hard here, though, to be honest. A little too hard for a demo. But I usually use these things as ways to block the stuff in. I use them as guide points, if that makes sense. So that's just not going to look great like that. It's too on and off, but it's going to tell me like where the shapes are. So I'm just kind of like stamping these in, and then I can come in with a low opacity brush and multiply and kind of blend it in, right? So it's not just metal or non-metal. There's a part where it's kind of burnished a little bit, right? Especially on this top part, kind of similar to like how I described the edge wear on the clip, if that makes sense. So here we got some highlights. I'm using literally the same stencil to, kind of do the same thing. If it looks like it repeats, I can just come in with another line. We can see here on that spine, it's some really bad projections, right? So I'm going to add a new paint layer, and I'm just going to change it to multiply, and then hit X, and then I can erase. There we go. Really simple. It's really not too difficult. I think the thing is when you're working on a complex project, is just having a set of objectives and some guidelines, because it can get really messy and complex very quickly. And you want to kind of have a process that you're going through, but at the same time, you want to know what looks good. So here, I'm going to see, watch how I'm just going to soften this up a little bit. You'll see it looks much better. Again, not a crazy shape, simplify, readability. There we go. So I want there to be some variety. I can later just dab some oil in these areas, and that's going to give just enough visual interest on those areas. But I have some nice contrast as well between the metal and non-metal. So I'll go ahead and add an anchor point here. This is going to be the spine anchor point. And then I can create another fill layer underneath my master. So we'll need to go back to the master right here. So this is the master blade mask, or blade master, whatever you want to call it. So we'll go ahead and name this. And then now we need to add an additional fill layer here, right? So we're going to add a new fill layer, and we want to change this one to linear add, right? So go ahead and add the spine. And it's only showing up, right? It's deleting everything else as normal. So we just change it to linear add. And so now our blade master mask is ready to go. Hopefully that's helpful for you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.